It's Thursday afternoon in Berlin. It's 4 p.m. Central European summertime, and it's Space Café time. And it's my pleasure to welcome you after some very busy times again to another episode of our Space Café Geopolitics 33 Minutes with Dr. Jessica West about Nukes in Space, our 2024 edition, and an analysis of the Russian veto at the UN Security Council. As always, we truly value your participation and your ongoing feedback. We are committed to learning from your input and continuous improving our webinars to make them more engaging and informative for you. Even it is almost a tradition, we will not do our space riffle today. I voted against it as I believe that topic doesn't let room for a riffle today. I'm Torsten, the publisher at SpaceWatch.Global, and we are a Europe-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. Allow me also to thank all our business club members for their support. This is what allows us to keep our independent journalism alive. We really appreciate that. If you want to know how to join the business club, just see the banner below. It's just a click away on our website, and we also try to put this link in the chat as soon as we can do that here. I know many of you are familiar with our website, our bi-weekly or our weekly and our daily newsletters, or our new Nobody Cares About Your Satellite Space Communication newsletter by Emma, and the Space Café podcast. So don't miss Marie-Pierre Boucher, a visionary from the University of Toronto, and that's called If We Fail to Do This, There Is Not Future in Space. And that's a podcast with Markus Moslechner, and you find the Spotify link in the chat, I hope. We also have new episodes on our Space Café radios, and we're featuring Professor Anke Kaiser-Pizzalla, the chairwoman of DLR from the Space Symposium. And on the geopolitical side, I had an interview with Juliana Süß from RUSI, the Royal United Service Institute, and a think tank, or in that case, the oldest military think tank worldwide. You can find our audios wherever you get your podcasts from. So, and those should be coming up here in the chat as well. And if you want to become a space watcher, visit our fan shop on our website. And if you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our webpage in the event section. And you can also find us on YouTube. And as Emma would say on this occasion, okay, we are done with the ads and can now finally start. So I'm super excited to have a good friend here today and someone I admire for her really outstanding and absolute needed work on my show. A very warm welcome to Dr. Jessica West.
Hi, nice to be here again with the SpaceWatch community.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jessica, for your spontaneity, because after last week's event, we decided on a short call, can we do that? It was even on the weekend, to capture what happened at the UN Security Council. So for those of you that does not know Jessica so far, Dr. Jessica West is a senior researcher at the Canadian Peace Research Institute Project Ploughshares, where her work on space security brings her into regular contact with the UN bodies and experts from around the world. She also served as the long-time editor of the Space Security Index report, and Jessica holds a PhD in global governance and international security studies from the...
I'll say it for you, the Balsoli School.
I never could pronounce it much better.
It's okay. Think Raymond Blackberry, yeah.
Okay. Which she earned by studying national strategies of resilience and threat containment. Once more, a very welcome to the show. Let's kick that off now here. For that, I would like to set the scene. End 2021, Russia conducted an ISA test just weeks before the attack on Ukraine. In January this year, just a day before the Munich Security Council, Russia announced the potential placements of nuclear systems in space. We see space on the other hand, as an active military domain already, and that ranges from just deterrence to active activities towards others. Last week, Wednesday the 24th, Russia voted the UN Security Council's resolution to reaffirm the Outer Space Treaty's ban on weapons of mass destruction in space crafted by US and Japan. Can you give us an idea why that veto was so remarkable and what happened in general?
Well, I think we need to take a step back to how we got to the UN Security Council vote, which is, you mentioned the context of the Munich Security Conference. And there's been, so when the idea that there might be a nuclear threat in outer space emerged, there was a lot of scrambling in the media, and details weren't necessarily clear right away. Russia has not said that it intends to have a nuclear weapon in space. Russia denies this, but there was a security leak of sorts of US-based intelligence that raised a fear that such a capability might be under development. The wording at the time was vague, a nuclear-powered anti-satellite capability, and so it was hard for those of us in the public to know exactly what was being discussed. So did it mean a nuclear object that would detonate in outer space, what we would think of as a nuclear weapon, or was it talking about nuclear as a power source that might be able to fuel a lot of movement in orbit for a microwave jammer or something like that? I think that recent information provided by American government officials indicate more strongly now that their concern is that it could be an actual nuclear weapon in outer space that would target satellites through a nuclear detonation. But that is denied on the Russian side. So just to clarify that. So we're kind of stuck with intelligence, not a lot of open source information, government statements. Certainly it's been taken very seriously. It's been discussed the need to reinforce the Outer Space Treaty, which bans nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction in outer space, has come up in multiple United Nations fora in the lead up to this UN Security Council vote. What I find astonishing is this is the first time the Security Council has ever had a vote related to outer space. Usually we're discussing security in regular channels of diplomatic fora, and we're talking about how to improve security. It's important to know what the Security Council does, which is respond to active threats or perceived threats. So it's not a channel for arms control. It's really a channel for responding to what states see as imminent threats to international peace and security. So that really stands out. The resolution itself reinforced commitments to the Outer Space Treaty. Maybe a little odd as a resolution at the Security Council level, because it asks states to sort of, reconfirm our commitment to the Outer Space Treaty, which Russia has been clear in other fora that it supports the Outer Space Treaty. There's a bit of wrangling back and forth, an attempt to add an amendment to it that would also tie in the Russian and Chinese proposal to ban all weapons in space, so not just weapons of mass destruction. And ultimately there was a veto by Russia. I don't think that's surprising. The undertone of the resolution is quite clear. The Security Council is also renowned for vetoes. That's the way it works, unfortunately. But that's sort of how we got there and where we are with this issue. But I think it's almost unbelievable that we're talking about a potential nuclear threat in outer space. If you had asked me last year, a few years ago, would we be here? I think I would be very surprised to see that, and also very surprised to see it escalate to the level of the Security Council.
I think we could have raised a question, would you believe ... to many things at the moment on the geopolitical sphere worldwide. And just to clarify for one of our listeners who asked, Thibaut Mallet, if we are talking about nuclear weapons in space or nuclear-powered satellites, we talk primarily about nuclear weapons, but also nuclear-powered satellite, because the definition is very blurring, because if you have a nuclear-powered satellite that has endless energy to spam and to jam what we see at the moment, then is it a weapon or is it just a threat? But at least it's nuclear-powered at the end. So.
Yeah, and what could be confusing is both might be under development. We don't know, and certainly I know I saw Victoria's here. There's also open source information from people like Bart Hendricks that point to the fact that there might also be nuclear-powered anti-satellite capabilities under development, and their nuclear is a source of fuel, not a source of an explosion. And so that's where a lot of the confusion in the early days of this issue really stemmed from. What are we talking about? Kind of sloppy language, and it wasn't necessarily clear. And that's partly also because we're talking about intelligence and we're not talking about formal reports. But over time, there's been a trickling of information and statements from the United States government, including last week.
Let's come back to what situation, what happened last week. I mean, when we followed the report, and there was a fantastic piece of Breaking Defense Theresa Hitchens on that quoted you and other sources, and also when you go to the official material from the UN, it's very open. And Russia responded to this international reaction with cynical ploy or a dirty spectacle. China responded with the language was inappropriate and unbalanced. Is that a typical diplomatic behavior wrestling? So, I mean, you are closer to all these buddies, and you hear them more often. So is that very usual, or is that something where we should step back and say, wow?
I think even 5 years ago, it would be unusual. I don't think it's unusual anymore. There has certainly been a diplomatic standoff or competition over the way forward on peace and security in outer space, not related to nuclear weapons, for more than 40 years now. And that's what you see playing out with the vote. So do we worry about capabilities to attack satellites, anti-satellite weapons, or do we focus on the placement of weapons in orbit? And so that's where the amendment to the resolution was tabled to add in the proposal to ban all weapons in outer space. But certainly the language at the United Nations on these issues has deteriorated in recent years. There have been many more accusations of different weapons programs. I would say less and less diplomatic language in some cases. And the split has really been between Russian and American-led initiatives, or Western and Russian and Chinese-led initiatives. So I don't think it's out of character. It's the forum that I find so surprising, that we are discussing this at the Security Council level. So we're not at a point where we're thinking about how are we going to protect or prevent future threats. If you're at the Security Council, you are raising an issue that you see as a more imminent threat. Now, the United States is very clear it's not imminent in the sense that it's about to be launched, or there is a threat in orbit at the moment. But I think there's certainly an effort to contain what they fear diplomatically. And I saw, Victoria's here. Hi, Victoria. They have a good FAQ on their website that came out, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago. So I would encourage people to look at that. And also the Counter Space Threats Report, if you want a sense of the broad number of counter space threats that are also in the environment and that are being coped with at the same time. But of course, nothing compares to a nuclear threat. And that is what is so unbelievable.
When we talk about Victoria, then we talk about Victoria Sampson of Secure Vault Foundation, for those that are not in the circle. So, hi, Victoria. As you mentioned, the diplomatic language changes. I think on one hand side, it's a good thing to a non-English or native speaker. But I think it is going into a way that it's very raw and, in my opinion, very inappropriate. I mean, it's how people talk on the street or on their blog here in Berlin. And that's obviously not a neighborhood you want to be affiliated with, but it's just on a personal note. And you mentioned the wider context, and I would like to go there. You are very active in many of these geopolitical bodies, so the Open Ending Working Group on Behaviors on Outer Space, other UNIDIR initiatives, the GGE, the Group of Governmental Experts, and PAROS, where I forgot the...
Prevention of an Arms Race in Outer Space.
So,
it's a mouthful.
Can you give us a broader context on that reaction? Is that a pattern? Is there a pattern that we can observe at the moment?
I think that the diplomatic standoff is a pattern where you have competing approaches to space security, and lack of consensus is definitely a pattern. And that's where what we had at the open-ended working group, at the group of governmental experts that wrapped up in 2019, probably at the group of governmental experts that will arise this year. Talking about nuclear weapons is not a pattern. We have the ban on nuclear weapons, to me, is at the heart of space governance. It's the first military restraint adopted in outer space. In 1963, it is core to the Outer Space Treaty that, in addition, then set out all the other principles for how we conduct ourselves in space. And we take for granted that states are going to adhere to this. But we also haven't done a lot of the legwork to nurture the Outer Space Treaty in ways that we should have been doing over the last 50, 60 years, including ways to talk about perceived threats, maybe outside of the UN Security Council. But so this topic is not normal for the diplomatic community dealing with prevention of an arms race in outer space. It's usually taken for granted that we don't have to talk about this. I think what we're seeing, though, is how important space is to military and security context on Earth. I talk about that in a paper I have on, gray zones in outer space, and we kind of think of space as separate from Earth. And I think for a long time that might have been true, where what happened in space rose above the mess here on Earth. And I think we're very much seeing today that that is no longer the case. They are deeply entwined in one another. We're seeing, I think, a return or an escalation of nuclear deterrence or nuclear threatening discourse on Earth. And so it might not be surprising to see an extension of maybe a nuclear deterrent approach to outer space as well. I think it is incumbent on us to reinforce the Outer Space Treaty, to come back to the diplomatic agreements we have, to bring the international community together to reinforce both the law and the norm, and the absolute abhorrence of the idea of any kind of nuclear weapon activity in outer space. I know Victoria had a question. Do we think it will be a General Assembly resolution? That would be my guess. This was a theme at the the open intersessional meeting of the group of governmental experts. Both Victoria and I were there, and many states were making statements, as well as civil society, about the importance of reinforcing the Outer Space Treaty, reinforcing the ban on nuclear weapons in outer space. At the end of the day, though, I don't know what the intelligence says. It's not always right. I think we know that, and so we also have to be a little bit careful. Sometimes there are programs that are not intended to turn into real things. It's hard to say what the future holds, but I think that's why we have a really good moment right now to exercise diplomacy, and to head this off.
No, I think as you mentioned, the military situation in space that we see today, sometimes I feel it's from a few agencies here in Europe, it's not ignored, but it's blindsided. They don't want to see that. They don't want to talk about it. What is a bit strange, because I think we have to live with it. I would like to put some context of the nuclear weapons in space for our listeners, and I made a read into that to prepare our talk here and myself for that. Nuclear weapons in space aren't unprecedented. I mean, we have seen them. US and Soviet Union at that point of time detonated at least 9 in outer space throughout the late 50s and early 60s. I mean, that was thankfully before us. The latest one, or the largest one of those tests, was the US Starfish Prime in '62, and they destroyed about 30% of the satellites at that point of time, which is a high number. And when we think about in the early '70s, so 62, how many satellites there have been in space? Potentially not so many. Also on Earth, and there was a question: do we kill people on Earth if there's a nuclear explosion in space? The EMP, the electromagnetic pulse, has results on Earth, and that grills your electronics. And I mean, we know how dependent we are on electronics, on computer chips for all of our life. So, and I think that might be not an immediate threat from a fallout or from radiation or from the detonation, but definitely from the EMP. And you mentioned that before, in '63, this limited test ban treaty moved the US and the Soviet Union to begin the negotiation, what eventually became the Outer Space Treaty. So just some knowledge on the here on that topic. We did have the Legal Subcommittee of UN COPUOS last week in Vienna, or over the last 2 weeks in Vienna. What did you hear from there? Was it the same behavior, or do we see signals of a consensus? Do you have any insights from there? And I know you haven't been there in Vienna like me, but did you hear from your well-informed sources something?
I did not, but picking up on that theme and what you just said, I think, we know that nuclear weapons in space are a very bad idea, and we know that firsthand. And I think that is why this is also so surprising, because this is an indiscriminate capability with a tremendous effect on existing objects through an EMP, which would harm the electronics, not unlike space weather, which we're also very concerned about, but much, much worse. And as well as long-lasting radiation in the environment. So I believe an article came out yesterday that pointed to the fact that low Earth orbit could be unusable for at least a year in the case of a nuclear detonation. And so that is highly concerning, and also points to the linkages between sustainability in the environment and security. And so that's this cutting across, I think, of the security side and, say, UN Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space and the Legal Subcommittee. And I think too often we have a hard time talking about issues because we silo them, safety and sustainability on one side and security on the other. But we know they're not divided like that. We know that security impacts the environment and vice versa. Environmental impacts can also raise perceptions of threats. So I think nuclear is going to be a topic of concern in a lot of different UN bodies. I think having a conversation in multiple places is good, but we also need to have an ability to link them up. But certainly nuclear power is being discussed more and more. And again, even if you're not discussing a weapon, how do you deorbit? What happens after the fact? I'm in Canada. We have firsthand experience of the damage that happens if something with nuclear components re-enters and lands on your country. We're not always good at foresight, even though we know the dangers that we're dealing with. So I know I haven't talked about that in a long time. We won't say how many years. There was a nuclear-powered rocket body, I think, that re-entered, I'm going to say 1982 in Canada, and landed in the Canadian North, but it caused a lot of contamination of the environment. It was a relatively unpopulated area, still a highly sensitive area in Canada, very sensitive environment. And I think it kind of slowed down the interest in nuclear powered capabilities in space, because just like on Earth, there's that problem of what you do after. It can have significant and long-lasting repercussions in orbit, but also on space. So I think nuclear is going to remain a topic of discussion in different ways at different United Nations fora. I think that's good. Talking is good.
Yeah, but I would like to see some results from the talks as well. I prepared a question about the Artemis and ILRS, as we see raising numbers, and if that will divide us into blocks. But as we have
we have a lot of questions, and I would like to go through them. My last question goes in the direction you just mentioned. I mean, the Outer Space Treaty prevents the weapons of mass destruction, but this does not exclude the nuclear for peaceful use. And as of today, our research said that we have about 60 plus nuclear reactors in LEO. So that means nuclear propulsion or nuclear electrical propulsion are discussed and proposed topics. So the DARPA NASA Draco project, for example, and of course, these technology checks all the positive boxes for the advancements of humanity in space, faster, longer, cooler, whatever. But it's also concerning in these two directions, the geopolitical one and the dual use and environmental one. And we will have some further thoughts on that in our reporting about how to, as you said, how to deorbit that, what is in, as we just recently learned, a nuclear safe orbit and graveyard orbits and so on and so on. What is your proposal? How shall we deal with the entire situation that on the one hand side, we have new, cooler, better technologies for the advancements of humanity, without any doubt, but with also this huge risk. And I'm asking that also as a German who stepped out of nuclear technologies 10, 12 years ago. And now we see also the results of that our power prices are very high compared to the rest of Europe.
I don't think it's confined to the nuclear issue. I think the harm that nuclear can impose, the sheer power of it urges a more precautionary approach to the deployment of technology. But in essence, it's the same challenge we face with a lot of technology in outer space, where it can be used for really wonderful things and really terrible things. And I think we have to develop more governance tools. And that might be in the form of laws and arms control agreements or other agreements. It might be norms. We also might have an opportunity to put into practice some of the existing or other aspects of the Outer Space Treaty. So if it's something highly sensitive like nuclear, maybe there's an opportunity to do inspections pre-launch. We've never really done that, but maybe there's avenues to start making our governance more robust, making better use of the tools that we have. But when it does come to nuclear, I'm always reminded, space isn't all the same. You mentioned neighborhoods, and so there are different orbital characteristics. And so the potential threat would be different depending if you're operating close to Earth, if you're doing deep space exploration. I think that's a very different question. But I still think it gives us an opportunity to do things better. So to start putting in place, how do we know? How do we know how things are being used? How do we know that they're safe? And there's a whole bunch of tools we can have, not only inspection, but also standardization, interoperability, more information sharing and transparency practices. But I'm a cautious person, and I think the precautionary principle is something that's really important if we're talking about nuclear powered anything, because we know the damage it can do. We've seen it on Earth, we've seen it in space. So, power can bound out beyond itself and do things that we don't always expect. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to address, someone asked about, how much of this is real, how much of it is speculation aimed at getting more funding and a budget. And I want to add, I think that's a real challenge that we face in outer space. A lot of information is secret. And so you get drips and drabs of intelligence and public statements. But I think the need to be able to trust information points to the value, I think, of open source documentation, of civil society, of the work that I do and Victoria and Secure World do, and others such as Bart Hendricks, who try to dig through open documents. And that skepticism, it's not misplaced, but it's also problematic when we're trying to have these frank diplomatic discussions to move an agenda forward. And so I think the more public information we can have that can be trusted by people, the better we'll be able to do our jobs.
Great. So we have a number of questions I would like to address, and also quick feedback here to Thibault. yes, we are going over our 33 minutes today as this topic is so relevant, and we know that. So, Emma, do you have some questions for us?
Can you hear me, first of all?
Yes.
Okay, good.
We can't see you.
That's my first question. Now you should be able to see me, I suppose. Okay. Yes, we have plenty of questions. I'm going to start with Marco Tomasetti, which is asking Jessica, if international tensions were to escalate, is there a possibility that the discourse on nuclear weapons in outer space could indeed degenerate also from the side of Japan and the US? Or shall we exclude this possibility?
I think, so I might be misinterpreting the question, but I think one concern is a further escalation of the situation. And so if one state is going nuclear, we've seen very much on Earth that others tend to feel the need to respond and I would see that as an escalation. I would hope not. There is no good outcome from the use of nuclear weapons in outer space. But I think this question also raises an important point. Torsten, you mentioned that the relationship between nuclear weapons and space isn't new. I think it's also important to point out that the United States and Russia have both, for a number of years now, had extended nuclear deterrence in outer space. And so policies that say, in the event that there's interference or harm with certain highly strategic capabilities, such as nuclear command and control, we are tying our nuclear deterrence on Earth to that. And so this nuclear entanglement between Earth and space is not just from this year, although we are talking about it in a different context now.
Thank you. And then a question from Thibault. What are the tactical benefits of putting nuclear warheads in space versus ground-based?
I mean, in theory, I think I know where this is coming from, which is the idea that such a catastrophic harm to the environment and objects in space could be like a constellation killer. Honestly, though, I don't see a lot of tactical benefit. I think we have many ways to mess up space without having to use nuclear weapons. We've demonstrated that with anti-satellite capabilities, with dirty bombs. I think cyber is another way where you can have a systems effect in outer space. I think it would be certainly a weapon of last resort. I also don't see the value of using them on Earth. And I think it's important to make the point that this is yet another example of why we need to make progress on nuclear disarmament overall. It's not just a space issue, it's an Earth issue, and one where nuclear powers have been dragging their feet.
But I can tell you that the military does have a different point of view on that. They are strongly believe in nuclear deterrence, and I got it in first-hand conversation with the many star generals, and I mean, it feels so wrong, and I'm absolutely with you. So, Jessica, on that. So I would like to see a disarmament here. But back to Emma.
A question from Victoria. I believe she was referring to something that was said in the first part of the interview. Do you think that they will resubmit it as a UNGA resolution?
Yeah, my sense is there will be a resolution at the General Assembly in the fall on this topic, and we'll have a split vote again.
Christophe, who loves very long questions. Jessica, about the weaponization of space and the banned use of WMDs, regardless of the device and the threat characterization, should an adversary of the West deploy nuclear-supported orbital weaponry? What are the odds of the US responding with countermeasures based on nuclear deterrence in space? How about that extending to cislunar space and the moon, and what would that imply for the OST compatibility with nuclear deterrence in space?
Yeah, it's a big question. Never say never. I don't have a sense that other states have an actual interest in nuclear weapons in outer space. Again, they hurt everybody. It's like cutting off your nose to spite your face. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You do just as much harm to yourself as to others. But again, nuclear deterrence has extended to outer space. It's just focused on Earth. And so there is a nuclear deterrent that applies to actions in outer space through nuclear policies. And so that's there. The moon, I personally don't see a lot of military value on the moon, let alone having nuclear weapons in the moon. So I would say I don't see that as something likely. But again, we also didn't think we'd be talking about this topic today. So.
Yeah. But when
never
we talk
say
about
never.
Yeah. When we talk about moon, and that's something what we also learned at the Space Symposium, is we're talking about power source, nuclear powered power sources for the moon. These reactors that I think NG and Lockheed Martin are working on it. And then we have the nuclear waste on the moon. Yeah, yippee. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I watched For All Mankind, and I know it's fiction, but it still sends chills down my back when I think of it.
Absolutely.
And then we have Robin. How does precautionary principle apply here?
I actually think we're a bit late for the precautionary principle on weapons in orbit. We already know we don't need to be precautious. We need to flat out not do these things because we know the damage they do, not just to ourselves, but to the environment and to everybody else operating outer space. Where the precautionary principle might apply could be nuclear on the moon. And so thinking about how to be more sure about risks beforehand. And so not having the, well, let's go ahead and see what happens and we'll fix it later approach, but really trying to weigh out potential risks against benefits. So being more cautious, I think, at the forefront. But when it comes to weapons, we're past that. We know the dangers and we should not go there.
Thank you. Tell me, Torsten, if you want to stop with the questions, by the way. So
no, we are fine.
Space nuclear-based weapons be an attempt to have a fast EMP strike capability?
I mean, I think that's the concern, that you can knock out a lot of satellites relatively quickly. And so there's, again, a lot of speculation. Because this is a capability that's denied or an interest that Russia denies. And so some is speculation about why you would want that. And I think that is part of the speculation, that you could knock out a constellation, or if you're further up in orbit, which I think would be even more concerning perhaps, could be you knock out critical nuclear command and control capabilities relatively quickly. And that, of course, is very much linked to the escalation of nuclear conflict on Earth. Like I said, because of that existing nuclear deterrence strategy that is in place in several countries. So it's speculation. Again, I think we have very good ways to mess up space without having to bring nuclear weapons into the equation. But nuclear also, it's always seen as the last resort, the biggest, baddest thing we can rely on to try to deter others. And so the fear component, the psychological component, I wouldn't discount that as well.
Thank you very much. We have a question about conspiracy theories and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Just to clarify, this is a chat where we discuss about geopolitical matters, not about conspiracy theories. So it's not that I want to censor the question, it's just the person in matter, the person quoted here, Marjorie Taylor Greene, is famous for not even believing that 9/11 ever happened. So I believe that here we are crossing a line between Fanta politics and actual real geopolitics. And I don't think this is the correct environment to discuss that. Anybody else? I think Thibault saying that some scientists wanted to denotate nuke on the moon for scientific reason. Is this a question or is just an observation?
I would also say that's a horrible idea. And again, I think this is where we need to think about security, not in a silo, but also in context of sustainability, safety, heritage. I know we don't use the concept of human heritage on the moon, but still we know that there's environmental and cultural and scientific heritage on the moon, and the moon belongs to everybody. I won't deny, though, that people come up with all kinds of crazy ideas. Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. And these ideas also come to haunt us sometimes, where someone has an idea, it never went anywhere, but it comes up over and over as an example of something that a state could do. And I'm going to point to rods from God is that example that just won't go away. Again, not an active program ever, But sometimes bad ideas just cling. The smell of them clings to us for a very long time.
Thank you. And Jessica, I'm going to close this session asking one question. Then I'm going to throw the question in the ring. What do you think we can do to prevent this kind of like disinformed / not careful use of nuclear, even for severe reason, nuclear power instruments without actually thinking about the consequences? Because I agree with everything you've been said. I subscribe it 100%. This is something I had the occasion also to discuss with Victoria. However, it feels to me that there is a profound detachment between the industry, which is just running to push the new toy that they can get, and the government and the population. What can we do to actually start a profound, serious discussion about what you're going to put up in space is then your responsibility to take back, and no, you cannot just abandon nuclear radioactive material in waste in space or on the moon.
I think that's part of bringing in the public and more states into space governance, having this be a more participatory area of public policy. Government clearly has a role, and also realizing, industry has an industry interest. Science, we have different interests that we bring to the table. It's the role of governments and then of diplomacy at the international level to think through the questions and to come up with the rules and the regulations, regardless of what other interests are. That's how it works. And I'm always optimistic. It's hard to work in civil society on peace and disarmament issues and not be optimistic. We certainly have seen ups and downs when it comes to weapons and international security, but I'm hoping that, as bad as it is, growing awareness of space that might be linked to the word nuclear, which grabs people's attention, also makes them think about the other threats that we face, the immense work that we have to do to maintain peace and security, safety and sustainability and stability in outer space, so that we can continue to use it for the future. And in closing, I see Victoria's comment that, you don't kill people immediately if you have a nuclear explosion in space. And I think that's one of the challenges. We don't see the human connections enough to outer space. So when I draw space systems, I draw people attached to them. We might not have primary effects, but we certainly have secondary and tertiary effects. And we certainly have a web of nuclear weapons and deterrence tied to very harmful actions like this in outer space. And so we don't know what the consequence would be, the response from other states. And that unknown was already terrible without introducing the possibility of a nuclear explosion. I think this would be incredibly hard to contain, not just from a physical perspective, but when it comes to what happens next. And I hadn't even gone there until this conversation today. So thank you. I'm now a little bit more afraid. A little bit more motivated. But again, I think we do need to think about the human connectivity, the people that are very much tied, and our future, and the future generations that are tied to outer space.
Thank you very much, Jessica. This was very insightful. And I think we're done with the questions, and over to Torsten for the conclusion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jessica. Thank you, Emma, for getting the questions to us. Jessica, is there anything you would like to end this with, maybe on a positive note, to not let us hang where we are now?
Okay, I'm going to give you a positive. There's a lot of people working on this. I am going to get another negative, just to make sure that we make sure that this is a topic for everybody. I think when we talk about space security and nuclear weapons, we think, oh, that's for the great powers or the nuclear powers. This is a topic for everybody, because nuclear weapons, per my PhD dissertation, they're a limit to resilience. They're a limit to our ability to cope with insecurity in many ways. And I know there's talk now about having more radiation hardened capabilities in space, but that's not going to apply to every object in every country and every use. And so the topic, again, I think comes back to the fact that we all need to be invested in this conversation. All countries and all people, this is about all of us. It's not just an issue for the nuclear powers.
Okay. Thank you very much. We are over our 33 minutes. Of course we are. So but I think that's not your fault. But I think the 33 minutes just became a brand for in that conversation, and I think that's great. So before we say goodbye, let me remind of a few upcoming events. And now, just waiting for the slide. Next week, I will be at GeoInt in Orlando. So that's 5th to from Sunday to I think Wednesday next week. And we'll report for you from there as best as I can, doing some interviews, some podcasts. As usual, if you are around, if you are at GeoInt, please let us know, let me know, and I'm happy to meet up there. And 2 weeks later, there is in Venice, the space meeting Veneto from the 20th to the 22nd, and Emma will be there because it's in her neighborhood. So, and Venice is always a good place to be. But there will be many more events that we create for you or report from in the meantime as well. I mean, the upcoming months are really crazy. So please find and subscribe to our events on SpaceWatch.Global or on our social medias. And as always, we would like to hear your feedback. So please check in with us on X, on LinkedIn, Facebook, at least for my generation. So don't forget to sign up for our daily, our weekly, or our new Nobody Cares About Your Satellite newsletters. And if you want to support more events like that, go treat yourself with something special and become a Space Watcher today, or help us in the Business Club program. So thank you all very much for your interest today. We had a good number of visitors. Unfortunately, we didn't manage to get it over to YouTube, something that we have on our to-do list for next time. But thank you, Jessica, very, very much for this, can I say, inspiring talk in this context? But
I mean, I'm always inspired. I always find something to inspire me. And I think it's the fact that so many people care about this topic that's inspiring.
So thank you also, dear audience, for joining us, and the tech team for the very smooth operations. We hope to see you at our next event. In the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. And don't forget to become a Space Watcher. Thank you very much. And Jessica, stay with us because we need your upload, then your video upload. With that, thank you very much, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Have a great day.